Well, we read the Beatitudes as a responsive reading, and now we have sung them as a hymn. So rather than reading them yet again, I'm just going to plunge into the message of the morning. At the end of July, Kim and I had 2 weeks of vacation, and I saw parts of the world I have never seen before. You see, all over the world, there are interesting places where people have set up webcams, and they've established a live video stream which is sent out across the internet. And all you have to do is go to YouTube and in the search bar type in live cameras, and it provides a long menu of interesting places all over the world that you can just drop in on and see what is happening at that precise moment. It's amazing. There is a water hole in the African desert of Namibia where I saw a herd of ibex drinking from the water hole. There they were, all gathered around the edge, except for the biggest one who had to walk right out in the middle and snort and show us what he was made of. There is a webcam in Venice that showed the people standing on a bridge enjoying the view of the canal, and along came a boat motoring down the canal. I watched a commuter train leaving the station in Tokyo during the morning rush hour, and I took in the sights from a double-decker bus wandering through the suburbs of London. I scoped out a fishing village on the North Cape of Norway, and I went there several times, and once I was lucky enough to see a herd of reindeer down at the bottom of the Monitor, making their way and feeding on the lichen at the edge of town. I checked out one of the back streets of a Philippine barrio, and guess what I saw? Rats running along down the sidewalk. It was amazing. I witnessed grizzly bears hunting for salmon at the waterfall at Katmia National Park in Alaska. I visited Times Square in New York and, of course, saw the Eiffel Tower in Paris. I took a train out of a city and out through the countryside of Thailand. I marveled at the nighttime view from the International Space Station and could see the lights from the cities down below. And guess what happens tomorrow? NASA will be launching Artemis 1. It's part of their new lunar initiative, and of course it's going to be live streamed somewhere in the launch window between 8:30 in the morning till 10:30. We can all watch it as it's happening live. How easy it was to enjoy the sights from all over the world for free. It cost me nothing. No passport to carry, no jet lag, no nausea from eating unfamiliar food, no currency exchange, no language barrier, no risk of my getting lost, no sleeping on an uncomfortable bed. But on the other hand, while I had seen some amazing things, it was very superficial. It's not like I had really been there. Real travel requires commitment and time and sacrifice and a willingness, courage to try new things, and perhaps the awareness that you will only get out of it what you are willing to put into it. We live in an age when many different levels of experience or involvement are possible. You could go to your computer and pick any spot on Earth and look at the satellite images on Google Earth. Perhaps you'll be fortunate enough to find that there is a live webcam of the place you're interested in, and you could see exactly what is going on at that very moment. Of course, it can also be very boring if nothing happens to be going on at that particular moment that you log on. Well, a richer experience would be to go along with someone like our good friends Rick Steves or David Attenborough on the PBS network, who would explain what we're looking at and the history behind it and why it's important and why it's significant to civilization. Or, if written by a skilled author, a book can provide a very compelling experience as we understand the background and we're given insight into what the characters are thinking and feeling at some particular moment. Back in the 1850s, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote the anti-slavery novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which, after the Bible, became the best-selling book of the 1800s. And it was so skillfully written that Queen Victoria wept when she read it, as did many. Well, there are many levels of involvement in life. We can hear the news on the radio, we can see pictures of important locations, we can read a story in the newspaper, we can be involved by dropping $1 in the Christmas kettle. Sometimes there might even be opportunities to become personally involved. But in an age when people are carjacked and gunned down in the street, why would anyone take that risk? For that matter, why would anyone go to all the bother and the expense to drive down to Citizens Bank Park when they can watch a baseball game on the television? And with television, they zoom in on what's important. They have replays of significant events. There are announcers telling you what you just saw. They have the little computers that add the strike zone box so you can evaluate every pitch. But you know what? Being there in person is a different experience from watching it on television. Being there in person is so much more compelling. I was talking to my nephew last weekend, who went off on a long recital about a Phillies game that years earlier he and his father had driven to Baltimore to watch. And he just went on and on about how it was the best game he had ever seen. It was the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs, and the Phillies trailed by 1. And he was telling me about who was on base, and it came down to where there was a full count, and what was potentially the very last pitch of the game, and the Philly batter swung and connected and hit a home run and won the game. Sure, from time to time I'll watch a game on TV, but by the next day I barely remember the score. But here was my nephew, years later, remembering every detail of an important game he had watched with his father in person. I think this might have been where Jesus was going with the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed, fulfilled, happy are those who take the time and the trouble and the risk of getting involved with life. Rather than just looking at the world through the screen or via the evening news, happy are those who find ways of getting involved with their lives. Now, Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. And this is one of these verses I've heard many different people translate many different ways. So let me take a crack at it. In the New Testament, we read time and time again that the people Jesus had the most trouble with were the ones who separated themselves from the people and the problems of the world by pretending that they were more religious and holier than thou and just closer to God than everyone else. For example, back in Deuteronomy, there is a verse that directs the children of Israel to have tassels at the corners of their garments as one way of differentiating themselves from others. But in Jesus' day, it had become popular to supersize the tassels so everyone would notice how differentiated they really were. Those who considered themselves to be righteous and superior and closer to God would not associate with the common people who they regarded as sinners. They didn't want their minds contaminated by those common attitudes or their lives tarnished by their common habits. Yet, Jesus hobnobbed with the tax collectors and the sinners. He seemed to enjoy their company. He was even seen and criticized for dining with them. It was customary among those who considered themselves righteous to undergo a ritual of hand washing, to remove the dust of the world, and to separate themselves from the contamination of all that was common. This was not done for purposes of hygiene, but it was an act of being religiously hoity-toity. Apparently, Jesus and his disciples didn't bother with it, or with a number of other human traditions, and Jesus noted that it was the impurity in your heart that was more important than the dust on one's hands. Among the religiously superior, there was a tendency to look down and pronounce judgment upon those they considered inferior. And Jesus told his followers not to judge, because the way they judged others would be the way that they themselves would be judged. Happy are those, blessed are those who clearly understand the condition of their own soul, who can accept God's grace and forgiveness, and who in turn can be gracious and kind and forgiving, and yes, even involved with others, knowing that they themselves are not perfect and will never measure up to God's perfection. Rather than being isolated atop some ivory tower of their own righteousness, Jesus calls upon all to be involved with others and with the problems and the pains of life. Back in the early 60s, Paul Simon wrote the lyrics to a song reflecting the perspective of a person who had been hurt by false friends and painful relationships. And now is sealing himself off from the world. He's taking a brand new approach. I am a rock. I am an island. A rock feels no pain. An island never cries. In other words, I've been down that road before, and I'm not going to allow myself to care or to feel deeply because I know how much that can hurt. A couple of years later, Dionne Warwick took the same theme to the top of the charts with her hit, I'll Never Fall in Love Again. What do you get when you fall in love? You only get lies and pain and sorrow, and so for at least until tomorrow, I'll never fall in love again. Well, life can be painful in so many different ways, but rather than withdrawing and insulating ourselves, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, who cry, who feel deeply, because they will be comforted. Blessed are those who stay involved and who share the burdens and the pains, the anxieties that others carry." The old saying goes that by sharing with others, your happiness is multiplied and your sorrows are divided. But it's also true that the more deeply you love and you allow yourself to love, the more painful the disappointments and the eventual loss and separation will be. Jesus also said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." He lived at a time when his country was occupied by the Roman army. He knew what happened to any who rebelled or opposed that power. He grew up in Galilee, which was a hotbed of insurrection against the Roman occupiers. When Jesus was about 11 years old, a man by the name of Judas the Galilean led a rebellion against Rome. He and his followers raided the armory at the town of Sepphoris, which was located just 4 miles away from Nazareth. And the Roman response was swift and very brutal. The town of Sepphoris was burned to the ground, its inhabitants were sold into slavery, and 2,000 of the rebels were crucified on crosses which lined the roadsides. They were not only executed, their bodies were left on the crosses to rot as a warning to others. But Jesus taught that there is another way, a smarter way than when confronting situations like this. It's smarter than confronting power with power or power with violence. Jesus taught his disciples to change the game. Over and over again, we find Jesus teaching new ways to respond to evil, the same kind of evil that we find in life from time to time. Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek when you have been given a slap of insult. When they go low, you go high. If they want your cloak, give them your coat as well. If ordered to carry a soldier's kit for 1 mile, go the 2nd mile." Rather than reacting emotionally, fighting, smacking him in the nose, rather than meeting force with force, Jesus encourages the disciples to be smart about this. Or rather than running away by moving out to the country to escape, Jesus taught us, We need to stay engaged, but choose a path of thoughtful meekness to transform the situation, to expose the thuggery and the injustice and how rude and crass your opponent is being. Open the possibility for constructive change and eventual reconciliation. In Psalm 37, Jesus would have read, "Do not fret because of the wicked, for they will soon fade like the grass. Rather, trust in the Lord. Do good. Be still before the Lord. Wait patiently. Refrain from anger. Forsake wrath. Do not fret. It will only lead to evil. For the wicked will be cut off, but the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant prosperity." Couple of questions to think about. Are we presently engaged with people? Are we involved with people who are having trouble facing the challenges of life? Or perhaps we find ourselves avoiding those kinds of people. Are you willing to risk feeling hurt or disappointed or grieving even by becoming involved? The old saying is, "Fight fire with fire." Are there alternatives? Are there ways that we can rise above the pettiness that some people will display? Can we move past the need to get even?